Ram, thanks for joining us. We're looking at trade over a 2 to 3 year time horizon. How is the energy transition going to reshape trade in that time period?
Well, look, I think we need to look at energy from a broader context in terms of not just trade, but the momentum that we've built up over the last couple of decades. So firstly, I think there's an increased level of requirement for energy security. And as we see it right now, energy prices are very volatile and very affected by geopolitical conflict. So there's always been a shift towards more and more renewable energy, but that's been very much driven by a climate change agenda. Now, the move towards renewable energy is driven closer and closer to energy security, which really that journey started during the Ukraine conflict when we saw prices of energy peak during that point. So that, I think, over the last few years, as we've seen more and more geopolitical instability, has become a primary focus. Not just for countries, but for utility companies that are serving those countries or serving a global need. And then on top of that, we have the perfect storm of electrification of everything. So we're now going to get a huge increase in demand from the proliferation of AI data centers. We're seeing electrification of mobility, electrification of heat. So as we move towards an electrically driven ecosystem or infrastructure, we are faced with the challenge of how do we kind of serve that, and with grid limitations. Two things that are happening in that area. One is, again, going back to having a greater degree of energy storage and local energy generation. So that gets sort of the volatility of renewable energy. So we're seeing a huge growth in storage of electricity in local areas to be able to do two things. One is to deliver energy as it's needed. So if you're a fleet of trucks or a fleet of buses, you need certainty around energy to be able to drive that fleet in and out. Equally, you have now the ability to store energy, and you have a massive energy infrastructure that didn't exist before in a depot. That then becomes part of the distributed energy grid. So we're moving from closer and closer to a really complex distributed energy system where you can take flexibility of energy back into the grid. So connected to that then is about how do you digitize all that? How do you optimize all of this? Because you can't control and manage this really complex energy system driven by energy security, renewable energy growth, electrification of lots of different transport infrastructure. It's now complicated, and you can only manage that through AI, through optimization of demand and supply to be able to manage it in the most efficient way.
The Middle East conflict has seen oil prices rise, very volatile, concerns about inflation. Is this in fact accelerating the drive for climate change, the net zero drive?
Absolutely. So as I said, it started during the Ukraine conflict, but I think the Middle East conflict has made that much more clear, and how vulnerable we are with even just one tanker being stuck, in terms of the supply chain. So the reality of it is going to take time, but the fastest way you can create energy security is to install renewables today. The second part of the energy mix that's coming in that I think will start to accelerate is small modular nuclear reactors, because these provide a very strong support infrastructure for high energy demand areas like large-scale AI data centers. But they pose a security issue. As we talked about before, we're not only talking about cybersecurity challenges around a more digitized, optimized grid, but we're also looking at physical security issues around having small modular nuclear reactors near demand requirement areas like cities, like data centers, which could result in attack. So I think we now need to think about this whole system from a security lens as well, physical and cyber, as well as anything else.
What about the compliance issue? Because there are a lot of companies shifting supply chains, changing their suppliers, changing some of their own operational procedures because of the need to comply with regulation. Is that still a driver of change in terms of supply chains and trade?
I think so. I think what we're going to find is, again, driven by security requirements, you're going to see greater and greater government policy that's about localization, that's about regionalization. So I think we're going to see a shift towards data sovereignty as a requirement. You're going to see a shift towards, on the other side, on the ESG, a more circular economy requirement, because again, reliance on raw materials that are outside of the control of the region or a country requires for them to start to think about, how can I kind of reuse, recycle the resources that are now operating within my own ecosystem. So I think we're going to see a greater degree of compliance coming in about energy security, about CBAM that's just gone live, around where do your raw materials come from, and circularity, etc.
One of the themes clearly here is security. It's physical security, it's energy security, it's national security. So is that going to be a theme of trade or reshaping trade?
I think so. I mean, it's hard to say how currently everybody's at the peak level of what concern and paranoia and wanting to have all of these things now managed. But there is also the challenge of the reality of the supply chain. So I'll give you a good example, battery technology. China dominates battery storage technology globally, and therefore, whilst we are still dependent on lithium-ion batteries, we are really heavily dependent on Chinese batteries coming in. Yeah. So however, there are concerns about security around that. How do you put data and monitoring of that technology to be able to control that challenge? So I think the same with data sovereignty. We heard from the Meta guys today. Although there is a need for localization and data sovereignty, China and America, between them, control most of the large data management companies, barring one or two, three companies all worldwide. So therefore, are we going to come away from that? No, but how do we kind of connect with those systems with a level of security that kind of protects our own needs and wants?
Ram, we must leave it there. Thank you very much.